For most of my life, I believed loyalty worked like gravity, quiet, constant, and impossible to escape. I was wrong. My name is Evelyn Moore, and until last winter, I thought I understood what family meant. I was 68, recently retired from a lifetime of bookkeeping work, widowed for nearly a decade, and the kind of mother who never stopped showing up. I babysat when asked. I contributed when I wasn't asked. I stayed silent when I should have spoken, believing peace was worth the cost. My son, Daniel, was the center of that belief. Every Sunday, I brought soup or pie to his house. Every school play, every birthday, every emergency call, I was there. When his wife Lauren entered the picture years ago, I welcomed her with open arms and quiet compromises. I told myself that blending families required patience. That love meant adjusting. The distance didn't arrive all at once. It crept in. First, dinners were rescheduled, then visits shortened, then excuses replaced invitations. "We're busy," Lauren would say. "The kids are overwhelmed." I nodded. I always nodded. By December, I was clinging to one thing: Christmas. When Daniel called and said, "We're doing dinner this year. You should come early," my chest filled with something fragile and hopeful. I wrapped gifts carefully. I baked his favorite bread. I even wore the scarf he once bought me, thinking maybe nostalgia still had power. The house was already full when I arrived. Laughter spilled from rooms I hadn't entered in months. Lauren's parents occupied the dining table. Her sister sat where I used to. The children looked up at me, not with excitement, but uncertainty. Then Daniel pulled me aside. His voice was tight, rehearsed. "Mom, this year is really about our family. You should head home." I stared at him, waiting for the joke, for the correction, for him to say I didn't mean it like that. He didn't. Lauren didn't intervene. No one did. I left without arguing. Without crying. I placed the gifts by the door like abandoned luggage and walked out into the cold. I told myself it was shock that kept me quiet, but deep down, I knew the truth. That wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. And as I drove home through streets lit with Christmas decorations, one terrifying question followed me all the way to my front door. How long had I been unwanted, and how long had they been pretending otherwise? The first 3 days after Christmas passed without shape or sound. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't remove the decorations. I sat in my living room wrapped in a cardigan that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine, staring at lights I had once believed meant togetherness. Every few minutes, my mind replayed Daniel's voice, controlled, distant, final. "You should head home." I wasn't grieving a moment. I was grieving an illusion. On the 4th day, something inside me shifted. Not sadness, clarity. I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. The way Lauren always redirected conversations when finances came up. How Daniel never met my eyes when I asked about long-term plans. How every thank you came bundled with expectation, never appreciation. That morning, I made coffee and pulled out a legal folder I hadn't opened in nearly a decade. It wasn't intentional at first. I was looking for old tax records, but the folder was thick, heavier than I remembered, and inside it sat documents tied with a faded blue ribbon. Property papers. I unfolded them slowly, my fingers trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. 8 years earlier, Daniel and Lauren had nearly lost their dream home. Their loan collapsed days before closing. I had stepped in, not as a cosigner, not as a lender, but as the buyer. I'd paid outright, planning to transfer ownership later once Daniel stabilized his finances. We'd spoken about it often back then, trusted each other enough not to write it down. Or rather, I trusted him. The deed was clear. My name alone. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding so hard I had to steady myself against the table. They hadn't just asked me to leave on Christmas. They had asked me to leave my own house. The realization didn't feel triumphant. It felt sobering. Like discovering you've been standing on solid ground while everyone else assumed you were sinking. Over the next 2 days, I did something unfamiliar. I observed. I drove past the house at different hours, not spying, just noticing. Lauren's parents were there constantly. Their car never moved. The children's toys were shoved aside, replaced by boxes and bags that weren't theirs. I hadn't been pushed out accidentally. I had been replaced. That night, I slept better than I had all week. Because for the first time since Christmas, I wasn't asking why anymore. I was asking what now, and the answer wasn't emotional, it was practical. The next morning, I called the attorney who had handled the purchase years ago. His assistant recognized my name instantly and scheduled me for the following day. As I hung up the phone, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not revenge, not anger, resolve. Because if Daniel believed rejection came without consequence, he was about to learn otherwise. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon polish, orderly, neutral, unfeeling. Exactly what I needed. I arrived early, dressed with intention. Not to impress, but to remind myself who I was. I had spent years shrinking to stay welcome. I wasn't doing that anymore. When Mr. Adler entered, he smiled politely, then grew serious the moment he reviewed the documents I laid on his desk. "This is very clear," he said after several minutes of silence. "The property is legally yours, fully paid, no liens, no transfer of ownership." I nodded, though my pulse hammered in my ears. "They've been sending me money," I said. "Irregular amounts. They called it a mortgage." He leaned back slightly. "That actually strengthens your position. It establishes tenancy, not ownership. Without a written agreement or deed transfer, they have no claim." The word tenant echoed in my mind. Not family, not partners, tenants. "And my options?" I asked. He hesitated, not legally, but morally. "You can reclaim the property. That means formal notice, possible eviction proceedings. Given the relationship, it could become unpleasant." I thought of Christmas, of the way Daniel hadn't defended me, of the door closing behind me like punctuation. "I can handle unpleasant," I said. He nodded once. "Then the law is on your side." We discussed timelines, notices, procedure. 60 days minimum if contested, longer if they stalled, clean, methodical, final. As I stood to leave, he paused. "I need to ask, are you prepared for what this will do to your relationship with your son?" I didn't answer immediately. "I lost that relationship when I was told I wasn't family," I said finally. "This just makes it honest." That night, I slept deeply until my phone rang the next afternoon. It was a neighbor. Her voice was hushed, urgent. "Evelyn, I thought you should know. There was yelling this morning. Lauren was screaming about lawyers. About deeds, about betrayal." My stomach tightened. They knew. Someone had seen me at the office, or talked, or guessed. In a town like ours, secrets never stayed buried long. An hour later, a message arrived from Daniel. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Main Street Cafe. Come alone. No apology, no explanation." A summons. I stared at the screen, surprised not by the request, but by how little fear I felt. For years, that message would have sent me scrambling. Rehearsing words. Planning forgiveness before understanding the offense. Not anymore. I typed back a single line, "I'll be there." When I set the phone down, my hands were steady. Because whatever conversation Daniel thought he was about to control, he no longer held the power. The cafe on Main Street was louder than usual, clinking cups, overlapping conversations, steam hissing from the espresso machine. I arrived early and chose a corner table where I could see the door. Old habit. I ordered plain coffee and waited. Daniel walked in exactly at 10. He wasn't alone. Lauren followed a step behind him, perfectly composed, coat pressed, lips already tightened in practiced restraint. The moment I saw her, I understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a strategy. "Mom," Daniel began, sliding into the chair across from me. Lauren didn't sit. She hovered, as if standing gave her authority. "We need to clear something up," she said. "This legal nonsense has gone far enough." I didn't respond. I sipped my coffee and waited. Daniel exhaled. "Why didn't you just talk to us first?" I looked at him, really looked. "Because when I tried to talk on Christmas, you told me to leave." Lauren scoffed. "That's not what happened." "Isn't it?" I asked calmly. "Then explain it to me." She opened her mouth, closed it, then shifted tactics. "You're upset. We understand that, but threatening our home, our children's stability, is cruel." "Threatening?" I repeated. "I haven't threatened anything. I verified ownership." Daniel's face drained of color. "You went to a lawyer?" "Yes." Lauren finally sat, leaning forward now. "Then let me be very clear. If you go through with this, if you try to force us out, you will not see the kids again." There it was. The words dropped heavy between us, deliberate and rehearsed. Daniel said nothing. I waited for him to object, to soften it, to say that's too far. He didn't. I felt something inside me go very still. "You're using my grandchildren as leverage," I said quietly. Lauren shrugged. We're protecting them. No, I said, you're bargaining with them. Daniel finally spoke. Mom, we're just asking you to stop. We'll pay more. We'll fix things. How? I asked. Specifically. Silence. Lauren jumped in. We'll figure it out, but destroying us financially isn't the answer. I leaned back, folding my hands. You destroyed the relationship before I ever checked a document. She laughed sharply. This is about control. You can't stand that Daniel has a life that doesn't revolve around you. I turned to my son. Is that what you believe? His eyes flickered, guilt, fear, avoidance. I just want this to go away. That was my answer. I stood, leaving my coffee untouched. The papers will be served officially. Any further communication goes through attorneys. Lauren's face hardened. You'll regret this. I met her gaze. I already survived being erased from my own family. Regret won't scare me. I walked out before either of them could speak again. Outside, my hands shook, but not from doubt, from clarity, because they hadn't come to reconcile. They'd come to intimidate. And now I knew exactly how far they were willing to go. The papers were served on a gray Tuesday morning. I didn't witness it myself, but I didn't need to. By noon, my phone had already rung twice. By evening, the entire neighborhood seemed to know. A woman from 3 houses down called first. She spoke carefully, like someone approaching a fragile animal. Evelyn, I just wanted to check on you. There was a scene. I closed my eyes. How bad? She shouted at the officer, loud enough for the street to hear. Said you were stealing her children's home. Said you were vindictive. I thanked her and hung up. An hour later, another call, then another. Each version slightly altered, each retelling more dramatic than the last. In every one, I was the villain. By nightfall, the guilt campaign began. A handwritten letter appeared in my mailbox, no stamp, no return address. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. It began politely. We know you're hurt. Then it twisted. Daniel hasn't been sleeping. The children are confused. Do you really want to punish innocent kids over a misunderstanding? By the second page, it became transactional. If you withdraw the eviction, we're willing to formalize payments. $2,200 a month. 15 years, in writing. I did the math without a calculator. It was a bad deal, financially and morally. They were offering obligation without respect, hoping guilt would close the gap logic wouldn't. I folded the letter, walked to the fireplace, and burned it without rereading a word. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at my door alone. He looked thinner, tired, older. Can I come in? He asked. No, I said gently, standing in the doorway. He swallowed. Mom, please, I messed up. I shouldn't have said what I said. You shouldn't have meant it, I replied. He looked down. Lauren's scared. So am I said. But only one of us was thrown out. He reached for my arm. I stepped back. I need specifics, Daniel, I said. Not apologies, not promises. How were you planning to make this right before the papers arrived? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was the moment I understood something final. This wasn't desperation. This was entitlement meeting resistance for the first time. I love you, he said quietly. I know, I replied. But love without accountability isn't enough. I closed the door. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I went somewhere I'd never gone before, a small community group at the local center. The topic was family boundaries. I hadn't planned to speak, but when my turn came, the words poured out. No one judged me. No one rushed forgiveness. They understood. As I drove home, something settled in my chest, steady, firm, unmovable. The worst was still coming. I could feel it, because people who lose control don't retreat quietly. They escalate. They came on a Sunday afternoon. I knew something was wrong the moment I opened the door and saw all 5 of them standing there, Daniel, Lauren, and the children lined up like a presentation. They were dressed too neatly, too formally, as if this visit had been rehearsed. My oldest granddaughter held a bouquet of flowers. The middle one clutched a wrapped box. The youngest gripped a handmade card so tightly it was bent in half. Grandma, she said softly, we're sorry. My heart nearly gave out. Can we come in? Daniel asked. I stepped aside. What else could I do with the children standing in the cold? They sat on the couch, stiff and quiet. Lauren stayed standing. Daniel cleared his throat. We've done a lot of thinking, he began. We were wrong, all of us. Lauren nodded, her expression carefully neutral. We want to make things right. She pulled papers from her purse and placed them on my table. A contract, professional, detailed. typed by someone who knew the law. "We'll pay more," Daniel said quickly. "$2,500 a month, everything formal, will be real tenants. You drop the eviction." I skimmed the pages once. Then twice. It was clever, very clever. They weren't offering repair. They were offering delay. 15 years of payments, appreciation, and control, hoping time or age would eventually solve their problem for them. I looked up at my grandchildren. Hope was written all over their faces. "Kids," I said gently, "why don't you go see if there are cookies in the kitchen?" They hesitated. Lauren nodded once. They disappeared down the hallway. The moment they were out of earshot, Lauren's mask slipped. "So," she asked, "this fixes everything." "No," I said quietly, "this fixes nothing." Her jaw tightened. "You want to punish us forever?" "I want honesty," I replied. "And you're still negotiating instead of apologizing." Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, please, we need this house." "You needed respect before that," I said. Lauren snapped. "You're doing this because you can't control him anymore." The children reappeared in the doorway, cookies in hand. They had heard everything. The youngest started crying. That was it. I stood. "You need to leave. Now." Lauren grabbed her purse. "Fine." We tried. Daniel hesitated, searching my face. I didn't soften. They left in silence broken only by a child's sob. When the door closed, I sank into a chair, shaking. For the first time, doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? Then I remembered Christmas. I remembered the door closing behind me, and I knew I hadn't started this. But I was going to finish it. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic echoes. No grand speeches. Just rows of wooden benches and a judge who looked like she'd heard every excuse imaginable and grown tired of all of them. Daniel and Lauren sat across the aisle from me, their lawyer whispering urgently between them. Lauren looked rigid, jaw tight. Daniel stared at the floor. My attorney leaned over. "Stay calm. Let the facts speak." And they did. The judge reviewed the deed first. My name, only my name, clear as ink could make it. Lauren's lawyer argued hardship, stability, children, emotional damage. He painted a picture of cruelty disguised as legality. The judge listened patiently, then asked a single question. "Is there a written agreement transferring ownership?" Silence. "No, Your Honor," the lawyer admitted. "Then we are not debating ownership," the judge said flatly. "We are discussing occupancy." Lauren stood abruptly. "This isn't fair. She's doing this to punish us." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down. This court does not adjudicate feelings." That was the moment I felt something lift off my chest. Not joy, not revenge, relief. Daniel was asked to speak. He stood slowly. "Yes, she bought the house," he said quietly, "but she was supposed to give it to us." "Supposed to," the judge repeated. "Based on what?" He hesitated. "Trust." The judge nodded once. "Trust is not a legal instrument." Lauren buried her face in her hands. The ruling came swiftly. They had 60 days to vacate. No extensions, no exceptions. If they failed, enforcement would follow. The gavel struck. It was over. Outside the courtroom, Lauren broke down, sobbing loudly. Daniel tried to comfort her, but she shoved his hands away. Neither looked at me. I didn't look back. The next 2 months passed in fragments, moving trucks, raised voices, neighbors whispering. I stayed away from the house, letting the process complete itself. On the final day, I returned. The rooms were emptier than I expected. Scratches on the floor, a cracked cabinet, a child's star sticker still clinging to the ceiling. In the master bedroom, something waited on the floor. A framed photo. Daniel as a baby, me holding him, both of us smiling. I picked it up and took it with me. That was all I kept, because some things belong to the past and some lessons must stay learned. 6 months after the house was returned to me, my life looked nothing like it used to. The silence in my home no longer felt empty. It felt earned. I rented the house instead of selling it. A young couple moved in, kind, respectful, grateful. Every month, the rent arrived on time. I didn't need the money, but I knew exactly what to do with it. I opened a separate account, one that Daniel and Lauren would never touch, and quietly began saving for the children's future. Whether they ever spoke to me again or not, they would not suffer for their parents' choices. That was my boundary. Not revenge, not punishment, protection. I joined groups I'd always postponed joining. A walking club, a book discussion circle, a watercolor class that left my fingers stained with color and my heart lighter than it had been in years. I made friends who laughed easily, who asked about me instead of what I could provide. For the first time in decades, I wasn't shrinking. Through neighbors and whispers, I learned how Daniel and Lauren were doing. They'd moved in with her parents. The space was tight, the tension tighter. Daniel's business collapsed without the financial cushion I'd unknowingly been providing. Lauren returned to work and hated every minute of it. They struggled. I didn't celebrate it. I accepted it. Consequences aren't cruel, they're honest. Daniel reached out once. An email, no apology, just a suggestion that enough time had passed and maybe we could move forward. I didn't reply. Because moving forward doesn't mean walking backward into the same fire. Do I miss my son? Sometimes. I miss the boy he used to be. The child who held my hand and believed I was safe. That boy no longer exists, and loving a memory cannot cost you your dignity. On quiet mornings, I sit by the window with my coffee and think about how close I came to giving in, how easy it would have been to choose guilt over self-respect. I'm grateful I didn't. The hardest truth I learned was also the most freeing. Love without boundaries becomes permission for harm. I didn't lose my family that Christmas. I lost the illusion that sacrifice guaranteed love, and in return, I gained peace. So if you're listening to this and wondering whether it's too late to stand up for yourself, at 60, 70, or beyond, let me tell you this: it isn't. You are never too old to choose respect. Never too old to draw a line. Never too old to reclaim your life. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away and finally put yourself first. Thank you for listening to my story. Ask yourself, what would you have done?